I'd like to call the regular Board of Education meeting on May 11th, Monday, May 11th to order. Please stand for the pledge. We have Kelly's flag in the back. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all. Kelly, would you please do the roll call?
Ms. Betterbid?
Here.
Mr. Case-Layout?
Excused.
Ms. Flynn?
He contacted me. He had a conflict.
Okay. Ms. Flynn?
Kristen's delayed.
Mr. Rakowski?
here.
Ms. Stadler?
Delayed.
Mr. Tseng?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Delayed.
Ms. Hewer?
Here.
Mr. White?
Here. I'm going to ask you all, please rise for a moment of silence for all the COVID-19, for the victims of COVID-19 for the pandemic. Thank you. All right, tonight's workshop, we have Dr. Matt Landau.
Kristen said she needs to be let into the meeting. Kristen says she needs to be let into the meeting.
We'll do that.
Not showing up in the week. Yeah.
She's not showing up.
Mike said she's not.
Is she in the other meeting?
Maybe she's in Google Meet. Yeah, let me check. Okay, go ahead and get started.
Okay, so tonight's workshop, we have Dr. Landau and Miss Anne-Marie Corderoni. They're going to give an update presentation on the budget. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt and Anne-Marie.
All right, great. Thank you. Mike's going to throw the slides up there in a second. Thanks, Mike. So I wanted to, before getting into specifically the budget, I want to take a few minutes to just kind of remind us of some of the work and thinking that we've accomplished over the last few years, and also just to talk about some of the things that we're working on right now and going to be implementing soon in terms of district work. So first, just starting with our mission to prepare every student for learning, life, and work beyond school. Mike, you can click to the next slide. We're going to be really focused for the next several months on, or really beyond that, what I'm calling the road ahead right now. And that's, in my mind at least, in a few different chunks that are all interrelated. One is recovery, another one is engagement, another one is strategic planning. And so the recovery part is really working hard as a district to prepare our school district for all of the options that we think could possibly occur next year for our students and our staff. And so that work is going to look a few ways, and I'll get to that a little bit more specifically in a minute or two. But that recovery part is something that we're spending quite a bit of time already thinking about in terms of getting the district prepared for all of the things that might be heading our way. Engagement, if we're to do more distance learning next school year or some sort of blended learning structure, which both seem at least possible, to make sure that we're integrating the strategic planning work that we worked so hard on the last couple of years, even more than is currently being implemented into our distance learning plan. And then the last thing is really trying to be strategic. Obviously, right now we're focused on the budget, getting a budget together, still waiting on the state, but a budget together for the voters next month, but also really thinking several years into the future. A lot of the forecasts say that we're looking at an economic downturn of several years. And so really trying to work hard to be strategic and plan thoughtfully for that. Mike, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to just quickly go through these, the board goals. I just wanted to remind everyone that the board has worked hard putting these goals together over the last few years. And these goals actually drive our strategic planning work. And I was looking back through some of my old presentations, and the last time we did a live board meeting on March 9th. I talked about having a dashboard that's measuring our work for each of these board goals. So that is still in the works. We obviously, it took a back seat for the last several weeks, but we're working on putting that back together again, and it should go live this summer. But our board goals of excellence, equity, and Mike, you can scroll through to the next slide. Fiscal, communication, sustainability, and culture of care, all are a focus of our work. And I'm sorry, I may have left off sustainability. I was copying from another thing, and I may have missed that one, so I apologize. But those 6 goals are the foundation of our strategic planning work and the work of everyone in the district. I think a lot of these goals have been evident in what's been happening for the past 2 months as our school buildings have been closed, but really the district has been open and working the entire time. I think especially of the culture of care in a lot of different ways, both with the meals program, which I've mentioned a few times is now close to 1,000 students served every week. And with those 1,000 students served, it's thousands of meals going out. We have a delivery model. We have pickup options at 2 of our schools. And we've also worked with community partners to provide meals at Meals on Monday, thanks to Fairground. We partner with community organizations around the free groceries on Wednesday. And we also have been working with Common Ground Farm and other folks on Fridays. Our buses go back out and deliver to specific families a food backpack program. I think of the work our teachers and administrators are doing and reaching out to families under the culture of care, and frankly, all the other goals to make sure people are doing okay during this difficult time, that they're connecting in some way with their teacher, and that we're working on furthering that connection. We've worked really hard in this caring model to also provide internet access for families that don't have it. We're now up to 25 families that we've provided for. We also have, the internet into our school parking lots. That's an option for folks, but we have been providing hotspots to families who need it. And so that has been great. So Mike, you can go to the next one, the district recovery plan. So I wanted to talk specifically for a moment about the beginnings of our recovery plan. So the first thing is we formed an internal committee. Right now it's just administrators on the committee, but we'll broaden that in the coming weeks to get a plan together to educate our students in the coming year in whatever way is possible. So the first thing we're going to do is a county effort. The Dutchess superintendents have been meeting on a weekly basis, and we agreed to work together as a group and work with Dutchess County officials in the health department to come up with some common health guidelines for schools. for next year that we can all implement in a consistent manner. I mentioned that we have started a recovery committee in the district with right now with administrators on the committee, and that will broaden to plan for and implement all the logistical issues that would go with opening of schools. I've mentioned before that could look a few different ways. One way right now is that it could look like schools back in session with a lot of different health guidelines and rules to make sure things are safe, or other countries and now some states that have reopened. Students have done some sort of like different schedule or different structure that it doesn't have all the students in the building at the same time, but just to give students access to some of the in-person part of learning that's important. And so that's would be like a blended model of some distance and some in person. And then also planning for if we have to do distance learning again next year to make sure that we're ready for all the logistics of that. Part of our recovery work is also working with this, what we're looking at is potentially a multi-year financial crisis. The crisis right now is coming from the state level in terms of the revenue drop off at the state and the planned reduction in state aid. We're waiting to hear from the governor on that. We're eyeing May 15th. That we hear creates a very tight deadline for us, but we're preparing for all eventualities. But right now we are working with staff, being mostly administrators right now, to plan for the budget with the board and with financial advisors also to try to map out a multi-year plan to get through this difficult time. Mike, if you go to the next slide. So I just wanted to remind folks of our of part of the strategic plan was the skills and abilities and attributes and dispositions. So I'll just focus on the skills and abilities really quickly, focus on communication, problem solving, creative and critical thinking, collaboration, and digital literacy. I'm going to be challenging our staff, our teachers, our administrators to find more ways to prepare for distance learning in the future if we have to use it, and to find ways to incorporate more of this strategic planning work and to focus more on these skills and abilities in the work that's going home through distance learning. It's difficult to do. Distance learning is not our ideal mode by any stretch. We'd much rather be in school, but to try to find ways that we're really trying to activate and develop those skills as much as possible in our students. Mike, you can skip ahead. And you can go past it, attributes and dispositions, to the next slide. So for distance learning, I want to just talk about some next steps. We are now entering week 9 of our distance learning, or not entering, Monday. Today, I guess, was the first day of week 9. It's kind of hard to believe that it's been going on for so long. So the first thing we're going to do, just to kind of prepare and do a little reflecting and try to improve, is by sending surveys out to all of our families, our staff, and our students. These would be slightly different surveys depending on the group. Focus on what has worked and what needs to improve for potential distance learning in the future. I think whenever you're in a major emergency action like this, which is what this was, you need to take a moment or two to review and reflect and look for ways to improve. And so obviously, I guess I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we don't have to do a lot of distance learning in the future, but we also need to prepare for doing it as best as we possibly can. So our goal is to have these surveys out and ready to go next week. They're just going to be simple Google surveys that will provide us with a little bit of quantitative data and probably a lot more qualitative data to review. And I know some teachers across all of our buildings have surveyed their students or parents about how things are going, but we wanted to do a more comprehensive look at distance learning as a district to find ways to improve. Next step is to work with in-district teams to plan for potential distance learning that aligns more, I should say more, with our district strategic planning, especially focused on student engagement. And then also just to review what we've been using for distance learning, to see, go back to the survey, talk with our staff that look at the survey data from all of our stakeholders to see if we need to shift any of our platforms, add to any of our platforms, or also look for maybe there's ways to get hands-on materials out to students and families if we have to do distance learning again. So I want to really do a comprehensive review just to prepare and make sure that we can do the best possible job if we're called on to do distance learning again, that we're ready. I do need to say I'm incredibly proud of our staff, our entire staff, for jumping in on all these initiatives as quickly as we did. When looking at other districts, the fact that we were able to jump really in on the first day of all this, which if I look back, I think was March 16th, and to jump in at the time with either learning packets or Chromebooks. But by the end of that week, Chromebooks were in the hands of almost all of our students, except for some of our kindergartners. And we had the meals program ready that first day as well. I'm really proud of both how quickly we were able to implement this, but also how hard people have worked to make the best of this situation. I'm also incredibly thankful to our families for supporting the learning as much as they've had at home. It's been tough and tricky, but it seems, just looking at my review of the news, I'm not obviously a medical person, but it looks like there's a chance at least that we may have to do distance learning again, and I want to be ready for it and find ways to improve on what we've done. Mike, you can go to the next slide. So Anne-Marie and I are going to sort of tag team on these slides a little bit, but this is just a review. We talked about it a little bit at the last meeting, but we will be sending out postcards with information about the election, and I think those are going out tomorrow. And Mike, you can go to the next slide. And also just some important dates coming up as well. So May 21st is the last day for the Board of Education to approve the budget. We have a very crucial date that's between now and then, and that is a hearing from the governor's office in terms of how much state aid might be further reduced. And we are obviously preparing for every contingency with that. But we're all kind of anxious at this point about what's going to happen further with the budget. Our budget hearing will be done remotely, and that's on June 1st. The ballots will all be collected by June 9th, and the canvass of the voting will be happening on June 10th. And we have question marks there. I wasn't able to attend a regional superintendent meeting last Friday. But there was talk about when the budget revote would be, if there needed to be one, and you have to do that if your budget does not get approved. And so we're awaiting information if that even occurs and when that would happen. If there isn't a budget revote, then the district would have to go to a contingency budget. And that would be essentially, we would be operating on the same level of funding that we're using this year. So that would be a lot of drastic cuts to have the district go forward. So the next slide, Anne-Marie's going to do and just kind of review where we are with our actual budget numbers.
So this slide shows where the budget numbers lay right now. It looks very similar to prior presentations. You'll notice the only difference that you will not see is a column for bus proposition. We usually allocate money to pay for the band when we purchase buses, because we do finance them over 5 years to match the transportation aid. But we had asked the board at the special meeting last Wednesday to basically revoke a resolution that we had previously passed to purchase buses. So the thought process was, since this is going to be a tight fiscal year, we wanted to use as many resources as we could for the budget itself, not knowing what the state aid number decrease will be at the end of this week, and then 2 further measurement periods. So we worked with Transportation Department, and we felt that this was not something that needed to happen this year. And this will help us, go forward with the budget. So for right now, this is the way the budget looks. We are at the tax cap under the levy for 2021, and that's our state aid number when the budget was approved a few weeks ago, and we're awaiting some more information. Mike, you can go down the next slide. So this slide we had talked about at a prior meeting as well. Part of the state aid budget was a pandemic adjustment that was a reduction of the aid that Governor Cuomo had put out. We are anxiously awaiting an update on May 15th. So for right now, the pandemic adjustment, the decrease also equals the Federal CARES Act restoration, the federal government amount. The federal government amount right now is staying at that, and we're thinking we might get a little bit of a change in the pandemic adjustment. The Department of Budget in the state level had mentioned May 15th, so we were recommended to kind of wait and vote on the budget right after May 15th. So that's why our board meeting is rescheduled to adopt the budget on May 20th, which is next week. And that's all detailed into the budget calendar that's on the agenda tonight. Mike, can you go down to the next slide?
So I'll just jump in. We like to just do a review of, we have had some growth over the last few years with our budget and added some really crucial pieces. And so we've added quite a few staff members, 7 to all of our elementary schools have benefited from district class size reductions. And we got that average down to about, across the district, it was about 18.4 or 18.5 this year. We added 4th grade instrumental music a few years ago, an additional social worker at the high school, a halftime art teacher position at the high school. We went 1-to-1 for Chromebooks, and we always talked about the secondary level. We talked a little bit less how there's a Chromebook for every elementary student. And just hugely thankful both to the board and Mike Healy, for our director of technology, for making this happen for the district, because it's the fact that we were able to just go so smoothly into Chromebooks for all of our students. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that that week of March 16th was when all this stuff rolled out, and we had a Chromebook in the hands of almost all of our students by the end of that week. And frankly, the only students who didn't have one were some of our kindergarten classes. The teachers wanted to do paper and pencil activities and not use a Chromebook. So the community support for that and the district support and the board support for that has been huge. And I'm incredibly thankful that we were ready, like we were, for that to happen. And then lastly, and this one is a sad one because it will be drastically reduced for next year. But we greatly revamped professional development in the district and provided PD for things like responsive classroom, restorative practices, an engagement institute, an equity initiative with our school equity leadership teams. So we'll be able to keep some of that going in future years, but it will look different, and we'll have to do it much more cheaply. Mike, you can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to talk about, and Emery may jump in on some of the budget considerations that we're going over right now. So we're looking at two of our elementary people are leaving, and not, at least right now, it could be more, but 2 of our elementary positions are leaving, and that we would not be replacing those. Now, that does not mean that a person who's retiring in a school means that's where there will be no teacher. It just means that we may have to reallocate people across the district. Looking at our numbers, that change would have our average to around 19.2 instead of 18.5. That would still be a class size average I'd be very proud to put forward to the community and comfortable with, both as a superintendent and a parent. And we feel like this would not really dramatically impact or frankly impact our elementary programming at all. We're still identifying exactly where this will happen. We're pretty clear we know where, but we want to make sure, and so we'll talk about that more specifically in the next meeting. But just speaking to an elementary parents out there, In elementary staff, again, this will not be a drastic change. Class sizes will still be around 18, 19, 20 for next year. We'll do our best to keep that focus, but these were two that we felt like we could keep our elementary program strong and not replace. The business teacher, that was actually proposed in last year's budget that we would not fill that. We actually didn't fill it this year because we struggled to find the right person for the position, but we would continue not to fill that. That we would not replace, we have 2 middle school math teachers leaving, that we would not replace one of those positions. Essentially, there's 3 math teachers at the 8th grade level. It's one more than the other grades, and that we would not replace one at the 8th grade level, so it would not be a change. It would not be a change in offerings at all. It would just be those class sizes would go up to around 20 or low 20s. I talked about a pretty drastic reduction in professional development. I was really excited last year to start our efforts in professional development. We laid out a 3-year plan to the board, but considering what we're looking at now, there's no way we'd be able to continue it like we had planned. So we will try to keep the momentum going, and we will do everything possible to keep the momentum going. And that could be through, distance sessions with some of these presenters, or just try and finding ways to do this more efficiently with resources. So we're not going to stop the work, but it just won't be at the level that we were doing it before. I do feel like we created a great foundation in those areas with responsive classroom, restorative practices, engagement, and the equity work. And so that foundation, I think, will really help us in years to come. Anne Marie and I and others are also looking across all of our departments for potential reductions. And we'll be spending the next few days finalizing some of them and or identifying them. So much of our work right now as a team is focused on finding every single budget reduction that is possible. So these budget reductions that we're putting in front of you are what we're thinking will help us get to where the governor's going to be. It could be worse. And so, we may be coming back with some more reductions. And like I mentioned, if we were forced to go to a contingency budget, then the reductions would be much more dramatic. And we also will probably talk a little bit about that at the next board meeting. Anne Marie, is there anything you would want to add to this process?
No, the reductions in maintenance, transportation, and clerical right now are to not fill positions that are currently vacant. So this way, it would be easier. It would be an easier transition. But like you said, if the reduction on Friday is a little bit more than what we're anticipating, or a contingency budget, God forbid, we would have to do more than that.
So just to review, we have a number of things besides the budget that we're working on right now. Our recovery plan is our recovery committee. It's planning for every contingency for next year that we possibly can imagine. Also, obviously, following whatever guidelines, which I assume are soon to come our way from the state and the county for how best to do this. Really looking at learning, our current learning model, and trying to find ways to improve distance learning with the thinking that we might have to use it again next year, and it's best to be ready and try to improve anything we do. And also really looking at our budget and trying to find as many efficiencies as possible, with at least right now not dramatically impacting the student experience in the district. So that will be something that we're always looking at and trying to evaluate things through. I do mention sometimes that, in these kind of presentations, that I look at this both with the eyes of a superintendent, but also a parent in the district. And I think both of those lenses are helpful for me. And so we really try to look at every single thing we put out there. We try to look at them from every single angle humanly possible to make sure that we're making the right decision. And that is something that we feel comfortable moving forward with. Also, just in summary, we're all going through just an unbelievable time in history, and both with health and with dramatic changes to our economy tied into that. And so we're all in the same struggle. And so, you know, I read different things to try to stay sane in this. And one of the things that I read says that you really need to focus on being grateful or show gratitude during times like this. And so I mentioned it earlier in the presentation, but I have to say it again, just how grateful I am for both the staff that I work with and the community that I also work with everything that we've done the last 2 months. Sure, we've made mistakes. We probably haven't done everything as perfect as we could, but we really moved quickly. I think we did it with a lot of heart and are doing it with a lot of heart. And we're really trying to put our best foot forward with the community. I'm very thankful to the community, just with all the support they've given us over the last 2 months, just in terms of supporting comments, virtual pats on the back, you know, questions that need clarified that help things run more smoothly, and all of the above. So I'm very grateful for both staff and community for helping us get through this. It seems obvious after this presentation, and if you pay attention to anything in the news, that we have more difficult times ahead. And so with the amazing staff that we have and the amazing community, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get through this in a way that's focused on students and that's focused on, you know, still trying to move our strategic plan forward and, you know, preparing, back to that mission statement I put on our first slide, preparing every single student we have for learning, life, and work beyond school. So, so the other thing that's unprecedented right now is that we stand in front of you today, or sit in front of you, in this case, in front of you today, trying to talk about a budget that you need to approve in a little bit more than a week, and we still don't know all of the things coming our way with that budget. That being said, you know, we're working really hard to prepare for every contingency. So, so with that, I just want to throw it back. We can take the slides away and go back to the full screen mode, but throw out there for questions for people or comments, and we're happy to try to answer.
Any board members have questions?
Yes, I have a question. Anne Marie, on the slide with the proposed budget for 2020 to 2021, it looks like tax levy is what we talked about earlier, the $41.6 million. So is it really the state aid portion? What is this? What does the $30,420,000 represent? Is it what we expect the state aid to be, or is this lower than potentially it's going to be, or what is that number?
That number reflects the allocation that Beacon received in the final state budget. So that's the number currently that we're working with, that we have. So since the tax levy is at the cap, there is no room to increase that. So we're just kind of waiting. So we're seeing how much state aid would be reduced. And then basically the only other place to take it from would be the total budget. So are things that Matt had just mentioned in the slide that we won't be incorporating in the budget when we bring it to you next week for adoption.
But with those reductions that we talked about, is that, are those taken into account in the total $75.9 million? Or are those yet to be, they would be still reduced if the state aid portion was reduced further?
If the state aid portion was reduced, then we would have to talk about those to be added. Right now, they are all currently in the budget, assuming the state aid stays the same. So being optimistic, we're hoping that Friday we don't get a reduction, and then we can move forward with that budget the way it is and ask the board to adopt it next Wednesday.
And how much, what, maybe you had it there, what does that represent? Like how, with the reductions that you have on the plate now, or that you could plan for, what amount would that be able to absorb?
So we have a list in addition to those things, because obviously next Wednesday night I have to talk about contingency as well, just because it's uncertain whether we even have the opportunity to revote. So I think that's an important piece to kind of get out to the community. So we have a list that equals over close to $1 million. So we won't need to hopefully use all of that, right? We won't get a reduction in aid of that much money, and we also hopefully will not go to a contingency. So we're planning for the worst and hoping that, you know, the best comes forward. So next Wednesday, after Friday, when they give us the state aid cut, then we can be concrete as to exactly what is not included in the budget. And then we'll also talk about additional cuts we would have to make in contingency. So it's kind of a two-step process.
I should throw out there, if the board feels like we need to have 2 meetings next week to discuss a little bit before we adopt, we're obviously happy to do that if you're willing or need to.
All right, thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Any other questions?
In terms of adding a second meeting, I mean, I guess we'll just get the news on the 15th and decide from there how do board members feel about that? Just like, as long as it's not grievous, shocking news, we can probably move forward with the budget as is.
I'm flexible. It's Anthony.
Right, me too. It's Mike.
Yes, me too, Alyssa.
Flora, the same.
All right. All right, seeing no other questions, the next item is we do have a proposed executive session. I know through the agenda setting, there was nothing that the administrators needed to talk about. I kept it on there in case the board member had anything about personnel that they needed to talk about that's on the agenda. Is anybody on the board feeling the need for executive session because they have questions about some personnel or something that's personnel related for executive session? Not hearing any, I'm going to ask for a motion then to waive the executive session.
So moved.
So moved. Oh, second,
Second.
Mike.
Third.
All right, comments or questions about this? Hearing none, I need a motion. I need all those in favor of waiving executive session. Thumbs up.
Aye.
Aye.
Anthony's thumb is up.
Okay. Opposed? 8-0. All right. So I need a motion to waive agenda items, the student and school presentation and parent groups.
So moved.
Second.
Is that you, Les?
Yep.
Comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried 8-0. Just for the record, there are 2 corrections to the agenda. It is on board docs, but the consent agenda item 7.07 to adopt the secret resolution has been removed. And the consent agenda 7.09, the approved creation of teacher retirement reserve amended resolution. All right. So we conferred with our attorneys, and the way our policy is written for 12:30, it doesn't really fit the public comment for the video conferencing. So that's why it's on the agenda to waive policy 12:30. And then what we could do is then we could open it to public comment. I guess the way the wording is of policy 12:30, it doesn't really go towards the video conferencing public comment piece. So I need a motion to waive policy 12:30 public comment to allow for the public to participate via video conference.
So moved.
Second.
That was Flora. Kristen?
It was Kristen, I think.
Comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried 8-0. And now I'm going to open it up to the public. If there is a public member on the video conference that would like to address the board, there is a chat feature. If you could just chat your name, then we can call upon you and we can unmute you so you can speak to the board. I knew she was gonna write something. All right, seeing no comment, we're gonna go to the next item on the agenda, which is committee reports, including board comments. We're gonna start with the facilities and operation. Kristen?
We are still in the process of sorting out our next steps for our architect and engineering firm. I think the plan is that we will, that the administrators are going to have a recommendation for in advance of our next meeting, which I'm not sure when that's going to be exactly. Matt, when do you want to do that? Do you want to do it? I mean, typically we would have it this Wednesday, but I think that you're still in the process of talking to some folks, right?
Yeah, I think the week after next would be best.
Okay.
Especially if we have to do, if things get worse from Albany and we need to have a couple of board meetings next week, it might be tough to do several meetings, but the week after next, I think would be perfect.
So the after Memorial Day then, like the 26th?
I guess or with Zoom stuff, we can also fit stuff in. I just know I'm working through it a little bit and making some headway. I just am worried about Friday's news throwing us off.
Yeah.
A little bit.
So the week after next would be May 27th. So just tentatively,
Okay.
we can schedule something for
Okay.
May 27th, and then we can always regroup and see where we are. And it would be good to just get some sense of what's going on with the roof and that.
Right.
That.
Okay.
But we could even do I can talk to you and we could do a committee update and I could share it with the board.
Sounds good.
Did you have any other comments, Kristen?
No, I really do just want to, I know we're all in for, I think we're all just bracing for the news this coming week, but I am, again, we say it every meeting, but super grateful for Matt's leadership and everybody really stepping up during this hard time. So thanks again.
Great. Any questions for Kristen? All right, moving on to the next. James is excused from the meeting. We do not have any policies on the agenda. I don't know, Anthony or Alyssa, did you want to give any updates with the policy committee?
I don't have any updates for policy. We haven't seen any new policies for review, so I really don't have anything to report.
Yeah, we did have a meeting in the beginning of the month on the first Monday of the month, and I think there are some policies that are pending the agenda. So it'll come out to first reading soon.
Okay. Did you get either one of you, Alyssa, do you have any other board comments?
No, not tonight. Thank you.
All right, Anthony?
There's nothing going on with diversity committee because we can't meet, but I did want to, this is kind of, I guess, a harebrained idea, but I kind of wanted to know what the board felt about getting help and trying to find outside funding sources. I know we've talked about grants a couple times throughout a few years. We have been successful in some grants, and I know they've helped us augment our offerings to our kids. So and I don't know if that's fair to make it all fall on Matt or I don't know. I just thought maybe perhaps there was a way to get, I guess, an army of the willing or some interested folks together with certain skill sets, and maybe we can do something.
Any questions for Anthony? Seeing none, we're going to go to Craig for public relations, legislative, and advocacy.
Okay, are you hearing me?
Yep.
Okay, good. So we've had some email exchanges with Meredith offering a draft of a statement. I would suggest that we should put this on the agenda for discussion at some appropriate point later on, and covers a number of topics of recent interest and is in the general category of advocacy. So I think everybody's had a chance to look at that, and some have commented on it. Can we put that on the agenda for discussion at someplace before the?
So why don't you make a motion, Craig, to add advocacy letter onto the agenda?
Okay, I move we add a discussion about an advocacy letter on the agenda for later tonight.
Is there a second?
Anthony seconds.
Comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried 8-0. So we'll add that, Kelly, just for minute purposes. We will add that on as 7.01, and we'll move the consent agenda to 8, and then we'll we probably won't need the executive session for that's now 8, and we'll adjourn the meeting at 9. All right, Craig, any other comments?
No, that'll do it.
All right, any questions for Craig? All right, Mike?
I have no comments to offer. Thank you.
Okay, Meredith?
I don't have any comments either. I missed the Dutchess County School Board Association meeting on Thursday. I'm sorry, at last minute conflict. So just echoing the same thoughts of gratitude.
Great. Any questions for Meredith? Flora?
Yes, so I don't have any comments either, just because the Wellness Committee obviously isn't meeting right now, but yeah, just to echo what everyone else has said and what we've been saying for weeks, I'm so glad that we have the team that we do to carry us through this. I'm very grateful and willing to help however I can, so thank you.
Right. And I have no comments.
I wanted to ask Flora a question.
Oh, sure. The one time I didn't ask.
I know it wasn't you. It wasn't.
I was like, all right, no one's gonna ask a question about that, and then boom.
Of course. No, I just wanted to ask about, or more so just put the idea out there, not to put work on you guys, but I was wondering if we could develop or think about developing kind of like a mental health needs assessment survey that we could send out. I could find like a standard battery of questions for separation anxiety and agoraphobia, and
We might even be able to reach out to the social workers and ask them.
yeah, I mean, I think what would be interesting, and I don't know, Matt, maybe you could speak to the privacy concerns, but I worked on one of these after September 11th for New York City Public Schools, and it was so that they could develop they had already done their budget, so they didn't have the money to develop like basically mental health curriculum. But they also found it was about 10,000 students, and it was at 5 boroughs, and the needs were different in different places. So, and then probably it wouldn't have to be as long as that. When I tried to find it, it's like 3 computers ago, because it was 20 years ago. But the things that were interesting, and especially because this would be a much smaller population, was just the things you don't think about, or the ways in which kids process things. So there were really simple questions in the battery of the survey, but then even the open ends, just how they phrase things and what was worrying them. And then you could kind of see the patterns that developed. I just think if we have the ability to gather that kind of feedback, and I don't know if it goes through wellness and Bill. Sorry, I'm gonna turn my phone down. So
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. I was saying, and maybe we also reach out to the social workers to ask them what kind of questions they think we should be asking as well.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know what that process would look like either. Matt is really the one who would be able to speak to that.
I think we just doesn't necessarily need to be a formal committee action. I think we could just look into it and then try to do something.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea. Like it's such a. This is like, you know, stating the obvious, but it's things are so different, and we're still struggling to get used to this, because like so often our go-to thing is to check in with kids physically, like to go to a class or talk to a group of kids, or, you know, do it individually, and we just don't have that ability right now. But I think it's a good idea. I'll look into some models. If you guys find some, you can send it my way, and I'll talk to staff too. I know the PPS department, you know, has really been leading the way with a lot of mental health issues sort of internally and trying to provide support. So I'll talk to them too.
Well, the other thing I would add is I thought about it too with the CNN did a town hall for kids, and it was with Sesame Street. It was in partnership with them, and my kids watched it, and it was fascinating to watch something kind of brought to their level and talking to directly to them and sort of answering questions about their experience. And I just saw, like, I think just you forget as adults, you just kind of put your own spin and like what's important to you in the way. And I think we're trying to make sure that they get the educational needs met and all the boxes checked. And there's some real fears that are brewing in ways that I think we don't totally understand. And it would be really great to get the student perspective. And I watched my kids after they saw that, how the temperature sort of came down and they were able to kind of articulate things. So even if it feeds into the circle work that we've been doing, if there's a way to do, like, if we start to see patterns of things that kids want to talk about, we could maybe do virtual circles where they are able to share and express and connect around things that are making them nervous, or things that maybe they even like about what's going on. But just
I know Duchess Mediation has started to do some virtual circles with us, but that being said, I think getting a sense of on a sort of a larger scale level what kids are worried about right now makes a lot of sense. I mean, honestly, it helps us both in the now, but it helps us plan, I think, which is what you're getting at, you know.
Yeah.
So it helps us deal with things right now, but it helps us plan over the summer for how whatever it's going to look like, that we prepare for that. Because as a parent, without getting into specifics, I worry about all of that part of it a lot. So
yeah, and I think we can get through a lot of the other stuff if kids are sound and feel sound. But
yeah.
I do know from that experience when I worked on that project that we had, because of the design of the sample, we had to get into very specific schools, into very specific classes in order to meet our statistical model. And a lot of times, you know, the principals would say, well, we're all the way out in, you know, Forest Hills, Queens, so we were nowhere near ground zero, so there wasn't a problem there. Or, you know, our kids are fine. But then the fascinating thing is you would get these surveys back, and the things kids mentioned, you know, they're picking up on so much and processing it in their own way, and they're not really free to talk about it. And then it becomes this sort of monster, even if with kids who hadn't been directly affected. So I think obviously our entire student body has been affected. It'll be interesting to know. And yes, it helps strategically, it helps you plan your dollars to have the most impact.
That's a good idea.
This is Anthony. I support that.
All right. Any other questions for Flora? I have no comments either.
So before we leave, there's one other thing I wanted to bring up, Craig. We have our board elections and budget vote coming up. And because of the changes that were imposed from the governor's office, all of us who were on the board whose terms expire needed to file basically a statement of a one signature petition, basically, which I did. I thought it would be appropriate for those of us who are planning to stand for election. Doesn't seem like running because we can't even get out and gather signatures, but in England they call it standing for election. So I'm standing. And I'm wondering about the other people. Have they sent in their petitions to be able to be on the ballot? And have there been any other petitions sent in by other people who are not presently on the board?
Well, Craig, I know I was up for re-election. I sent in mine. The deadline was today at 5 o'clock, so I don't know if anybody else did. I'll let Kristen was up for re-election. I don't know if she put in or
I did.
herself. So Kristen and I both are put in our letters, Craig. And I know the
Yep.
deadline is today at 5 o'clock, so I haven't checked with the district to see if anybody else did or not.
We didn't receive any others.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So now we're going to move to the item added to the agenda, which was a discussion about a letter, an advocacy letter that Meredith drafted for the board. So I know, Craig, you added it to the agenda. Meredith, do you want to start out with the discussion as to the rationale behind the letter, or?
Sure.
Yes. So what happened, I think Meredith got inspired. I wouldn't be surprised at first she got kind of ticked off at some of the things that are going on at the state level and saw some problems with what is coming down from Albany. So she burned the midnight oil and wrote up a piece. And before discussing this, I just wanted to say that we should realize what we did at the last meeting was to consider three kind of formalized statements and spent a good deal of time on one sentence until we finally came to almost a consensus, and it was an 8-1 vote. So I think we have to understand here that if we're going to do some effective advocacy, we're going to need to cut each other a little bit of slack. We can all play super editor all day long and super critic all night long, but we won't get very far if we elect to do that. So that's my preliminary statement. And at that point, I would suggest turning it over to Meredith to give some background on why she decided to write up this piece.
Well, thank you, Craig. Meredith?
Well, I think Craig put it pretty well. I feel like things are moving very quickly in Albany with not a lot of transparency and just big names being announced as being part of the solution, but a lot of little names missing. So I wrote this kind of as a way to share what we are experiencing. I think it's not that easy to just as a parent or a citizen to keep in touch with what's going on. You can watch Cuomo's press conferences, but they actually don't give a lot of detail, and a lot of detail is missing. So I put together this letter that basically tells a little bit about what Cuomo is doing with his Reimagine New York initiative. It criticizes the fact that there are not, I think there's one parent now on the committee, but I don't know if there are any K through 12 teachers, superintendents, but Bill Gates and Eric Schmidt, two billionaires that have very deep roots in technology and stand to profit from public education becoming more technology oriented, have been invited. And then there are a couple quotes from the teachers union and from a parent group criticizing that move, and also just summarizing a little bit of what we are facing here. The decisions we make have real immediate impact on our students. And so I just listed a couple of the several of the things that we've been able to do over the past few years as we stabilize the district since Matt arrived. And also, I was also responding to a letter from, that was published in the New York Times by an 8th grader who's saying she really loved distance learning. And one of the reasons she said she really liked it is because her learning was no longer disrupted by disruptive students. And that for me just really set off a lot of frustration thinking about our strategic planning and the attributes that we had figured out that we wanted our ideal graduate to leave Beacon schools with. And empathy was top of that list. And this just felt like exactly why distance learning cannot do the same job as in-person learning. So it's a long letter. I'm thinking of it as the first of many, but I did try to remove anything that would be, after our last conversation, I think I really recognized what feels like it gets everyone in their corners. And I really think that there's so much that we agree on. I tried to stick with that. And I would like to send this to our elected officials. I'd also like to send it to the Highlands Current, Poughkeepsie Journal, New York Times. And yeah, keep looking at what's going on. Oh, and the last thing that I mentioned in the letter is that, our legislative body has not met. And so it's kind of just like a one-man show putting this budget together, and it doesn't feel transparent. It doesn't feel like democracy. And so I have a lot of issues with that as well.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm really excited by it. I know it is long, but I think it's something that it sort of covers all the ground that I think we need to cover, and we can always take pieces and focus on them separately and in greater detail. But I think it's really important to kind of cover the whole scope of what we're facing here. And I think a lot of pressure is being put on local school districts, and then multiply that by 10 for school districts that have been waiting for state aid. And I think it's, we really do need to speak up for ourselves, because those press conferences every day are, I watch them. It's definitely a bully pulpit that we can't compete with. And I do feel like the governor is defining a narrative that is not necessarily accurate, and certainly does not reflect the complexity that we're faced with. And just on a personal note, as the parent of a child who has a disability, learning this way is not easy, and it's definitely not a solution for all our kids. And so I think it's really important that we start talking about this as board members, as parents, and as citizens in New York. I think it's really good.
Meredith, I thought you did a really good job with the letter. I thought that you touched upon several points that need to be touched upon. I also wanted to add that I shared with the board earlier today. I'm sorry I didn't get to you sooner, but Thomas P. DiNapoli, the state comptroller, came out in April of 2020 with a state fiscal year 2021 enacting budgeting in a time of crisis. If you paid attention and if you could read it, I think pages 9 and 13 in the report really resonate and show as to what we could do to looking at reallocating and how the federal government is working and what they're going to be supporting as well. But I think it's important that if you make yourself aware of what they're looking at for budgeting in a time of crisis, as to what their thinking is and how it could impact education pieces. So, but I thought the letter was great. I have no problem saying I fully support it, and I think we should definitely put it up as a, hey, the whole board supports it, and let's get it out to people that we need to get it out to.
I agree. This is Flora. I thought it was great and on point and important.
I agree as well. And as I'm reading it right now again, I was glad to hear you say that you'd send it to the newspapers, because it reads like an op-ed, and I can see where we could encourage the community to write their own letters at the end of this.
I would like to add that we should also post it on our website. Sometimes we make statements that we send off to politicians or somebody who is in a high office somewhere. But we should not neglect our whole base here in town, all of the students, parents, voters, taxpayers, and anybody else who reads it. So we have a place on our website where we can post news. So that's probably a good thing for the administration to think about, how the internal systems that we have can be better used to get this kind of word out.
So, do we want to make a resolution to send it, or do we want to take a vote to have it be sent out to our elected officials and or the newspapers?
That's fine with me.
Okay, so I need a motion to send the letter that was shared with the board and send it out to all relevant elected officials and area newspapers and post it on our website.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Flora, you're gonna get the second. So Alyssa got the so moved, and Flora got the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried 8-0. All right. All right, bear with me 1 second. All right, moving along to the consent agenda. The consent agenda, the use of the consent agenda permits the Board of Education to make more effective use of its time by adopting a single motion to cover those relatively routine matters which are included. Any member of the board who wishes to discuss individually a particular piece of business on the consent agenda may so indicate, and the item will be considered and voted on separately, thus preserving the right of all board members to be heard on any issue. Is there any item on the consent agenda a board member would like pulled?
I would like to pull the seeker resolution is not on the agenda anymore, or do we have to vote on? Is that like, are we voting on it being removed?
It's actually being removed because at the last board meeting in April, when Dan drafted the language, he included all of the parts that were needed in this seeker when the board declared the roof repair being an emergency. So it had all of the same language. This seeker we received from our architect, so I didn't think it was done, but Dan caught it before we came to this meeting, so he told us to strike it because we had already done it.
Okay. So I just wanted to pull 7.09.
7.09.
I'd like to pull 811, that's the schedule.
Oh, sorry, it's 8.09, yeah.
8.09, 811. Any other items? Hearing none, I need a motion to approve 7.01 through 7.10 minus, I need a motion to approve 8.01 through 8.10 minus 8.09.
Wait, what about 11?
I didn't include it in. I went to 10 instead of 11.
Oh, that's right, you did.
Moved.
Second.
Who was the second? Aless?
Yep.
Comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carried 8-0. All right, I need a motion for 8.09.
So moved.
Second.
Comments or questions? Go ahead, Meredith.
I just was wondering if you could explain the name change. I'm sure it's not a big deal, but.
So again, Dan was extremely helpful in looking at our resolution. So this is the legal language that needs to be on a board resolution to create a teacher's retirement reserve. So when it was created last year, it has to be called a reserve subfunds resolution because technically a TRS reserve is the subfund of the ERS reserve, which we already have on our books. So that's the way they characterize it. I also know that Craig in an email asked some questions about the funding part, which is needed to be in the resolution anyway. It talks about the 2% of teachers' salaries per year that could be allocated towards that reserve. So that's why the change. So there's specific language that was passed last year by Como, and that language has to be in the resolution. You can't just create a TRS reserve. It has to be done this way.
Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried 8-0. I need a motion for 8.11.
Motion for 8.11.
Is there a second?
Second.
Comments or questions?
So, so we're only cast for this meeting. So they all start at 7. That's what it says on top, right?
Mhm.
And then we're canceling the 19th. But we are having the 20th. We're canceling the 8th, but we're having the 1st. And then we're having the canvas on the 10th from the election on the 9th. Is that how that reads?
Yes.
Okay. And then the 22nd. All right. Just want to confirm that I understood what I was voting on. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yes, I was wondering if there's no time set for that canvassing. Is that something we'll have to do later when we figure out the details, or how does that work?
Because it's the next day, Craig, it could be at 7 o'clock, I'm assuming, correct, Anne Marie?
Yes.
Let's
Okay.
say 9:15. Canvas of votes, 9:15.
That's for the canceled meeting, Alyssa.
Oh, I see.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried 8-0. Is there any executive session material that any board member has? Any administrator have anything? All right, I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Anthony, so moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, everybody have a nice night. Thank you all for your participation. Hopefully good news from the governor this week. All right, let's cross our fingers.
All right.
Favor
Thank you very much.
adjourn.
Night.
Thank you.
Aye.
Night. 8-0 at 8:14. Emery, I'll stop by. I know I have some things to sign.
Yeah, what time do you think you come by?